morning everyone and welcome to the TAC Event of 2025 and for joining me into designing and delivering quality training insights from Outcome Standards 1.1 and 1.2. I hope you all enjoyed Claire's informative session this morning. I certainly think that she provided a lot of good information for RTOs about the way ahead. And hopefully I'm just going to build on some of that this morning and specifically looking at two particular outcome standards. A couple of housekeeping things though. You've got the queue, everyone should have the piece of paper in front of them, so please, if you have any questions as we go, feel free to use the QR code and put your questions in. And if we have time at the end of this 50-minute presentations, we'll take questions. But if we don't have time, then the questions will go up on the TAC Hub, and you'll be able to go in and have a look at them after today. Okay. Also, for the purposes of this presentation, because I know there's a lot of people here from different sizes, scales, types of RTOs, I'm going to be using the terms trainers for people that work as either lecturers or facilitators or whatever you deem to call yourself. And I'll be using the word students to capture learners, apprentices, and trainees. So when I talk about it in that context, I'm talking about everybody, just so you're all aware. There is a fact sheet that's been developed for this session, which you can access via the QR code as well. And interestingly enough, the fact sheet that's been developed for this session isn't necessarily just about this session. When you read the fact sheet, after each of the important points that I'm going to cover around particularly the performance indicators, there's additional fact sheets that you can actually access as well. So it's not just the one fact sheet, it actually directs you to other important fact sheets as well. So it is a very useful resource, so please go in and use it after today if you've got any other, any other thoughts about today that you want to share. Okay, is everyone used to my accent? Yeah. Nobody's sitting there going, I don't know what she just said. No? Okay, we can progress on that vein then. Okay, so what are we actually going to cover this morning? We're going to have a look at, I'm going to give you a bit of overview and background about obviously the introduction to new standards, and you heard a bit about that from Claire this morning. Some of that I will touch on again, but other things hopefully I'll bring a kind of bit of a different perspective and other things that you can actually think about. We're going to look at quality areas and specifically quality area 1 because obviously outcome standard 1.1 and 1.2 sit within quality area 1. We're going to have a detailed look at those particular outcome standards. And in part because particularly outcome standard 1.1 is brand new to these standards. I'll give you a bit more about that in a minute. There are 80 performance indicators in the new standards. There are 80, but thankfully, because we've only got 50 minutes, we'll only be covering 8 this morning. You'll be delighted to know. And then what I hope to do is give you some tips and hints along the way about how you can either use the information that I've given you and also how you can demonstrate compliance with some of the new outcome standards as we go. There have been a number of changes and impacts in our industry, in the VET industry over the past 10 years, as I'm sure you'll all agree. We've got skill shortages and staff shortages, which of course were probably pre-2015 anyway. But of course, we know that COVID in 2020 exacerbated all of that. We've had massive advances in technology, particularly to artificial intelligence. And of course, we know that we've got general intelligence coming and super intelligence coming as well. And what will those impacts actually mean for us? And also, we've had changes in government and therefore government policy. And also, general changes around the look and feel of what industry want from us now as training providers. But with those changes comes opportunity. And that's the way the message this morning was really about. These new standards are about opportunity. They're about the opportunity for you to review your practice, many of the practices that you're already doing and doing very, very well, I'm sure, in all your RTOs. But it's about reflection. The 2025 standards are about your opportunity, not to panic about, oh my God, we've got a new set of standards. And to be honest, I'm sure if I still had my own RTO, I'd be panicking. But in saying that, it's an opportunity, and you need to really consider it like that. So with opportunity comes various things. And those opportunities are really what I've put up there on the board. And it's about strengthening the focus on quality outcomes, for students and employer, and the shift to what we're calling outcome-based standards. And I hope from Claire's presentation this morning you got a sense of what that meant. So we're moving away from administrative, and yes, you still have to be compliant, but what we're really looking for is what are you doing and what is the positive impact you're actually having on your students. We want to provide, the standards provide greater clarity for RTOs and the regulators so there's less confusion, and we hope that with the introduction of the new audit report, you'll find that as well. Then we want to ensure there's more flexibility and innovation, and part of that is also linked to the last dot point, which is about the fact that our sector is diverse. We've got public RTOs that have 30,000 students that they enrol in a year, and we have small private RTOs, and some of them have only got 30 students that they enrol in a year. So our sector is very diverse, and therefore the move to outcome-based standards should actually be a good thing, because you should be able to consider it in the context of your own RTO. Now for me, this is really important, and particularly when I think about if I'd still had my own RTO, what would that look like and feel like for me? The new standards, what would that look like? I was a relatively small RTO, although I did deliver nationally, but what was the context of my business? You know, how large was I? Okay, so I might have enrolled, for example, 1,000 students a year. Did I deliver online mainly, or was it face-to-face, or was it a mixture? And the majority of the work that we used to do was all face-to-face. I would have to consider that in the context. The other thing I would look at were who were my students. My students were generally those that were fully employed or trainees in the workplace. But for you, it might look and feel slightly differently. If you're an enterprise-based RTO, for example, all your students are likely to be employed in your own business. So the context in which you're operating becomes really important for the 2025 standards. Within that context, you can then develop practices that actually suit your business. I just want to reiterate about the shift from the 2015 standards, because I do think it's important. The focus, well, yes, we still all have to be compliant, is about outcomes. So it's less administrative. So it's not about, do you have a checklist anymore? How do you use that checklist or the procedure? It's actually about what does that mean in terms of outcomes for your students. So what you do is you prioritise the desired result of a process rather than adhering to the rules. And the best way I can explain it is when you're designing training, and I think we've all probably done it if you've designed training at all, is you go to the assessment requirements. And what does the assessment requirements tell you? But in terms of the new 2025 standards, what we want you to do is not think about that first. We want you to put the student at the centre of your process. So what do we want the student to come out with at the end of the day? What practical skills and knowledge do we want them to have when they leave you? Okay. So that being said, let's get into quality area 1, which is about designing and delivering training. Now, I'm not sure how many of you had the chance yet to look at the new standards and what they mean. But every quality area, so there are 4 quality areas, as Claire said: training and assessment, student support and wellbeing, the vet workforce, and governance. And we're focusing on quality area 1. So the outcome of quality area 1 is about recognising quality training and assessment engages vet students and enables them to attain nationally recognised industry relevant competencies. And the key word, and I'll come back to this because it's within one of the other performance indicators, the key word here is engages. That's the key word. What we're looking for you to do is engage. Engage with students, engage with industry, and tell us how you're doing that. What processes are you using to do that? What kind of great quality feedback are you actually getting? I don't know if you know, but alongside the new 2025 standards, there has also been a policy document that's been developed. And in that policy document, it's a really good resource. And if you haven't read it yet, you probably want to go back and do that. It was produced by DUER to support the 2025 standards. And within it, it actually tells you the intent of each quality area and the intent of each standard. So you can actually start to unpick what it was that the designers, when they designed the 2025 standards, were actually what they were looking for, what they actually thought was going to happen with these new particular standards. So I want to, so it's called the policy guidelines, and I'm sure it'll be on the TAC Hub if you want to have a look at it. So Quality Area 1, Training and Assessment, is one of the biggest quality areas in the new standards. It's equal only to student support and well-being, which tells you something about the priority of training and assessment. While the 2015 standards did mention training, it actually was very limited. I don't know how many of you have kind of go back and reflect on the 2015 standards, but in the 2015 standards, the only real reference to training was about the amount of training that was delivered. And I see some people nodding. And of course, there was nothing else in those 2015 standards about training. But now, of course, up front and centre, we've got training and assessment. So out of all the quality areas, all the outcome standards that are in the new standards, for trainers, this is the most important outcome standard 1.1. What's the intent of Quality Area 1? The intent of Quality Area 1 is about bringing together all the essential elements of good training delivery. So that's about providing training that employers know is relevant, industry standard, and can be informed by current practice. It's about implementing an assessment system that adheres to the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. And it's about being transparent in your approach to assessment, including having an RPL system and a credit transfer system that is robust enough and up to date and can be used by your students. So what we're going to do now is take a closer look at outcome Quality Area 1. Quality Area 1 has 4 focus areas. In those 4 focus areas, there are 29 performance indicators. Again, we're only covering 8 today, but there are 29. Because I sat there the other day and I counted them. Because I thought, that's really, somebody's going to ask me that question. That was what I thought. So there are 4 focus areas. The first one is obviously training, of which we have outcome standard 1.1 and 1.2. The second is assessment outcome standards 1.3, 1.4 and 1.5. The third focus area is RPL and credit transfer, and you'll notice that RPL and credit transfer have been separated. And they cover outcome standard 1.6 and 1.7, and facilities, equipment and resources, which is outcome standard 1.8. So, context of all of that. We now have quality areas. We've got 4 quality areas. Within each quality area, we have focus areas. And in Quality Area 1, we have these 4 focus areas. We've got training, assessment, RPL, credit transfer, and facilities, equipment, resources. Within each focus area, we have outcome standards. And as Claire mentioned this morning, it's the outcome standards that you will have to maintain compliance against. And within the outcome standards, we have performance indicators. And the performance indicators are the detail that you need to read and understand and put things in place to be able to meet the outcome standards. I hope that's all making sense. Excellent. Okay. We're now going to have a look at the outcome standards. Whew. So what I want to start off by saying is, if you've been in training for any length of time, this may feel a bit like, yes, I've done this before, I've seen this model before. But that's okay, because it doesn't matter how long you've been doing any job, a refresher is always good. And so what I would do is, if I'm talking about things that you kind of go, yeah, I kind of know all that, I remember that from my teaching days when I was doing my teaching prac or when I did my Cert 4 or my diploma or whatever, I would just ask you to stop and reflect and ask yourself some key questions around, well, you know it, but are you actually putting things into practice? So outcome standard 1.1. Training is engaging, well-structured, and enables vet students to attain skills and knowledge consistent with the training product. And there are 5 performance indicators within this outcome standard. And my plan here is to take you on a journey through each of those performance indicators. So at the end of it, at the end of, when I get to the end of Outcome Standard 1.1, you'll go, yeah, I've got a good understanding of what this is about. I have some idea about how I can demonstrate compliance, and I'm all good to go. So I'm hoping to take you on a bit of a journey. So the intent of Outcome Standard 1.1 is about ensuring that the design and delivery of training is engaging and recognises the diversity of your students' needs and their learning styles, and enables them to build practical skills and competencies. In addition to that, I would add it's about meeting student aspirations as well. In summary, Outcome Standard 1.1 is about ensuring students are put at the centre of training design, not at the end, or not an afterthought, or not after you've looked at the assessment requirement document. It's about putting the student at the centre. What is it those particular group of students, or that particular group of students, depending if you're working one-to-one or in group, what is it they actually need? We want to build students that have got practical skills that employers recognise when they go to them. They go, wow, this person has been really well trained. They're industry current, their knowledge is fantastic, they're adaptable, and they're just being, this is an RTO that I want to use again. That's what we want employers to say. And lastly, we want to ensure that training is designed and considers the learner characteristics, needs, and that word again, about their aspirations. So let's have a look, go to the Performance Indicator 1.1a. Training is consistent with the requirements of the training product. You need to understand your training product before you can actually go to the how am I going to deliver, okay? The training products that are listed on the National Register, training.gov.au, which I'm hoping you're all very familiar with, are explicit and detailed in the information that can be used, particularly as a good starting point. And again, they will tell you the what you have to do, but as good trainers, they won't tell you the how, and neither they should. Because if you're dealing with different groups of students in the workplace or online or face-to-face, that will look and feel different, and so it should. But there are basically the elements up here that I've put, the 5 key things to think about are, first of all, your training package, which I hope you're all very familiar with, which details the knowledge and skills required for a particular industry. And in your training package, as we know, that information is generally expressed in units of competence. Then you've got your units of competence, and your units of competence tells you the skills and knowledge that are required within a particular industry. Then you have the assessment requirement documents. And the assessment requirement documents will tell you the skills and knowledge and conditions that a student must achieve competency under. Then you've got the qualification itself. And as we know, if you've looked at qualification, you get core electives, which you have to deliver, and the choice of elective is yours to design, yours to choose depending on the students that you've got, to make it as interesting and engaging for them as possible. Then what we've got, and I've included licensing requirements here because this is really important, because licensing requirements vary from state to state, and it's important that we are in Western Australia, we understand those within the context of the training product. And licensing requirements basically are statutory or mandated by government to ensure public safety, consumer protection, and to ensure generally that students are being taught at a specific level so that when they go out into probably high-risk industries, the industry have a level of comfort in terms of the training that they've been given. How best to implement knowledge and skills? That's the challenge for us all. So that really takes us to the how, okay? So the next 4 performance indicators are no longer about the what. The what is 1.1a. So in summary about 1.1a, what I would say is you basically got to understand your training product. So, and I've put this couple of questions to you. When was the last time that you went back and looked at a unit of competence, rather than someone just give you a session plan and say, go and deliver this? When was the last time you went back and had a read of the training package of the qualification? Was it weeks? Was it days? Was it months? Or in some cases it might be years because you're just given a session plan and go to teach. But if you go back and reread a unit of competence, I bet you'll always find something new and interesting in it about A, how you could be doing things better, Perhaps things that seemed when your session plan was designed were important but are less important now because of the changes in industry needs. There are always things we can learn from, go back and read in the training products. So performance indicator 1.1e reflection questions for you are about, is it time you go back and reread something that you probably haven't read for a long time? Performance indicator 1.1b enables the VET student to attain skills and knowledge consistent with the training product. The mode of delivery has to be appropriate for the skills and competencies being delivered within the training package. Right? That's the bottom line. So, for example, where the course requires students to build practical skills, the mode of delivery has to ensure the students get the opportunity to build those skills, or else it's making a bit of a nonsense of the whole unit of competence. Other than short courses, many qualifications now have an element of work placement in them, be it formal, where you've got to go out and it actually says in the assessment requirements they've got to go and do 180 hours or 120 hours or whatever it is. But what we're generally finding is that because of the way students learn, which I will come to, people are now looking to us to vary and develop how they're actually taught. So your mode of delivery, be it classroom-based or in the workplace or online or a combination, you have to put the student at the centre of that and actually determine what's actually going to work for them. So there's got to be, in terms of training, there are a number of factors that you have to consider when you're looking at modes of delivery, apart from what it says in the qualification or the unit or in terms of the assessment requirements. So first of all, it's about looking at your training and assessment resources. Do you have adequate training and assessment resources to actually support different modes of delivery? Do you have industry support? You might want to put students on work placement, and I know that in the health sector, that's been a bone of contention for a long period of time. The training package has asked in some qualifications for students to go out and participate in the workplace, do complete work placement hours, but often finding work placement, actual practical places for them has been a challenge. You've got to think about the characteristics of your students, the cohort that you're actually working with. Do they have disabilities that may or may not impact on their particular mode of delivery that you want to enact with them? And you have to think about the RTO's capability in terms of staff expertise, technology infrastructure, things like the onset of what's coming in terms of artificial intelligence. These are all things you have to consider when you're thinking about your mode of delivery. However, instead of thinking about chalk and talk, which is the old traditional method, where we used to get up and we talked to a group of students, and I'm sure if I think back to my own days when in the 1980s when I first went to college and then university, that was what it was all about. I think though nowadays, students want something different. We all want something different, I think. We want to embrace technology to a certain extent. We want to have that personal connection with a trainer. We want to build practical skills. So I think the balance is about finding a level at which you can satisfy all the needs of your different students and obviously achieve the outcomes at the same time. Performance indicator 1.1c. Training is structured and paced to support VET students to progress, providing sufficient time. And these are the next 4 words are the most important words in this performance indicator. Providing time for instruction, practice, feedback, and assessment. A lot of how, as trainers, we've spent our time before, we might do the instruction, we might allow the students to, practice, and then we assess. But how often do you give students feedback during both the formative and the summative assessment phases? There are lots of things to ask and consider in designing a training programme that ensures instruction, practice, feedback, and assessment. And you may wonder who this is on the screen. Anybody know? And it's not my dad. This is Socrates. Okay? And the reason I draw your attention to this is the Socratic question is about developing critical thinking. And at the start of any good design, you have to become a critical thinker. Okay? You have to ask your questions, things like, you have to ask yourself questions about how long are my students going to take to develop competency? How much time do I need to commit to the training? Who are my student cohort? What do they look like? What mode of delivery am I going to use? And all those questions, when you start to unpack them, should give you a good starting point in terms of your training design. Now, most RTOs have as a key component of their training assessment strategy or your training plan, whatever you call it in your RTO, information around the duration of training. However, how many of you have actually sat down and thought about feedback as a component of your training formally? Now, we all give formal feedback to students as it's progressing. You know, they undertake something. You know, you ask them a question in the classroom, or for example, and they give you a great response. You say, that's a really good piece of feedback, but can I just add X to it? We all do that, okay? But are you formalising that in some way? And are you thinking about it? Are you thinking about all your students in the classroom? If you've got groups of students, are you ensuring they all get sufficient feedback to allow them to think that they can then proceed to the assessment phase? I believe that providing meaningful feedback to students is a fundamental right. I actually believe that's partly what they pay for. They pay for you to give them feedback, both during formative and summative assessment. So let's look at a simple design model to help you, a simple model to help you with the design of your training. Now again, I don't want to teach people how to suck eggs. If this is something you're familiar with, fantastic. If not, if it is you're familiar with, use it as an opportunity to reflect. I've chosen the ADDIE model, which was developed by Greg Kearsley and Greg Culutta back in 1975. And up until 2020, when I still had my own RTO, this was the model I used, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. So basically, there are 5 phases in the design of a training program. The first phase is what we call the analysis, which is where you're gathering information. What is it I'm trying to achieve? What are my goals? What are my objectives? What does the learning environment look like, i.e. your mode of delivery? So you're gathering lots of pieces of information. The second phase is the design phase, and that's about thinking about instructional strategies that you might use, materials, activities, and whether or not you're beginning to think about what I'm planning in my mind, will that meet the objectives of the training product in the design phase? Now, put that in context, we've started with 2 phases already out of 5, and we haven't yet got anything down on paper. We haven't actually developed anything. And that's a really good thing, because often when we're designing training, and I've done it myself, we jump to the development phase. Oh, I know what this needs. I've read that, I know what I'm going to do here. But actually, it's incumbent upon all of us to go back to the first phase and the second phase, and to take time out and to actually think about, what are we designing and why are we designing it? And what do I need to really make this a really good opportunity and experience for my students? The third phase is what we call the development phase. And that's really where you start to get things down on paper. Okay? I want to draw your attention, I want to link this phase, which is about the development, where you, as I say, you start to put things down on paper. I don't know how many of you had the chance to look at Outcome Standard 1.5b yet. 1.5b states that you have to review your assessment tools prior to use. Okay, now I'm just drawing your attention to here, I'm making the connection. As part of the development phase, part of for the design phase, you'll have been looking at what kind of assessment might want to give my students, what's going to work for them, what does it say in the training product. By the time you get to the development phase, you will actually have already to think about how you will design your assessment tools prior to use. Okay? So in meeting this performance indicator, and if you follow a model similar to this, you're actually meeting the requirements of Outcome Standard 1.5b as well, because you're actually going to review your assessment tools prior to use. Okay? However that review looks like. The next phase in the design process is what we call the implementation phase. And this is where you start to get some, you basically deliver your training, your learning program. It includes going back to what the key components of this performance indicator are, ensuring that you've got enough time for instruction, practice, feedback, and assessments, which are now a key requirement of this performance indicator. The final phase is evaluation. And you all do this in different ways, shapes, and forms. But basically, it's about looking at feedback from different stakeholders and going, how can I improve this and how can I make this better? And we'll be covering that shortly as well. I also want to make a connection here for you around the 5th stage of this model, which is about evaluation, and outcome standard 1.5 itself, because 1.5 itself is about validation. And if you evaluate, you probably have an evaluation process, a validation process in place. This will actually link in with your validation process under outcome standard 1.5 as well. Performance indicator 1.1D. So we've done A, we've done B, done C, we're now in D. Okay? So we looked at the training product first. That was 1A. Then we looked at our mode of delivery. And then we thought about our design. And now what we've got to do is go, right, okay, what are my training techniques going to feel and look and feel like? What activities am I going to use? And what resources do I need to engage with the vet students to help support their understanding? The key word again here is engage. Because at the moment what we find is that when we've been looking, Claire referred to a couple of the pilot projects that we've worked on. And in a couple of the pilot projects, when we talked to RTOs about this, they all said, oh yeah, I've got a student satisfaction survey. But when we looked at the student satisfaction survey, the student satisfaction survey only measured student satisfaction, not engagement. I can be satisfied at the end of a training program. Doesn't mean I was engaged in the training program. So, quick top tip here is to go back from today and look at your student surveys and look to see, is there a question there about actual student engagement, or does it just say student satisfaction? So there are 4 key learning styles that all trainers should be familiar with, and many of you will have, remember this from your Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, yes, am I right? VARC, the VARC learning style developed by Neil Fleming? Yes, no? Yeah, okay. So a bit of a quick recap about this. So under student learning style, why is it so important? Only when you understand someone's learning style can you design good training, or can you deliver good training. There's no point in delivering training to me if I'm a kinesthetic learner, i.e. I'm a hands-on practical learner, if all you're going to do is give me words and texts. There's no point in that, because I'm more likely to switch off and disengage in the process. And if this performance indicator is all about engagement, isn't one of the first things we need to do is understand the learning styles? So the 4 key areas of the VARC model. The first one is about visual learners. And that represents learners who learn through discussion, through conversation, explanation. You know the students that like to talk? Yes, that's those students, okay? Auditory learners, representing those who like to learn, auditory learners who like to learn, oh sorry, I got this round the wrong way. Visual learners are those that like to learn through obviously graphs and text, graphs and pictures. Auditory learners are those that like to learn through discussion and conversation. R representing those that like reading and like looking at words and texts. And K is about the kinesthetic learners, those that want to really have practical and hands-on experience. What challenges does this present for you? Performance indicator 1.1C, as I mentioned earlier, is an importance of design. So if you take the time to design your training correctly, you're more likely to consider the different learning styles of the student cohort that you have. So how do you find out about student learning styles? Well, during the pilot, one of the things that came up, which was a positive thing, which was about someone said, oh, I went back and I looked at my official enrolment documentation, but the questions that we ask in support of all the event miss data that we need. So you know how we need all this event miss data for our reporting requirements, but RTOs talked to us about additional questions that they asked at the beginning, pre-training, about people's individual learning styles. So they just asked general questions about, how did you like to learn? Do you like using computers? Are you a practical learner? Do you like reading? That type of thing. Just some basic questions that help you understand the different learning styles of your students. However, the complication is that nowadays most of us are all multimodal, which basically means that on any given day we'll use a variety of these interchangeably. And part of that is because of the introduction and the fast pace of things changing with technology. So while students might have a preferred learning style, I think it's also important just to gain an understanding of how multimodal people are. Okay? That will help you design your training. In terms of designing training and making it engagement, what I did was, when I was thinking about the presentation today, I wanted to kind of move you from the traditional methods to get you to think about some collaborative teaching learning. It's either, you either call it collaborative teaching learning, instructional design, or advanced facilitation. Okay, so there are 3 ways we can refer to this. But basically what it's about is moving you away from traditional methods of learning and things that your go-to, if you like, when you're designing training because, oh, I've been doing it for a long time and it worked last year or last month for this group, so I'm just going to do the same thing, to get you to think about what else can I do. Okay, so there are a range of different things that you can do. And in the fact sheet, I've actually detailed a lot more about what's involved in each of these. However, this is a snapshot of literally hundreds of different advanced facilitation techniques that you can use. So the 3 things I decided to show you, partly limited by time today, was first of all about icebreakers and energizers. Now we've all done them, haven't we? We've all been to training sessions where we've had to participate in icebreakers, right? Some of them you've probably thought, oh, that was all right. And others you've thought, well, that was good fun. Now what made it different? What would generally make something like that different? It's generally about understanding you as a learner, believe it or not. It's probably because it actually hit a button with you about how you like to learn. And interestingly enough, I was thinking about today's session and the best training sessions that I think I'd ever been to and the best icebreaker that I'd ever participated in. And don't ask me for the life of me what it was about, because I can't remember. It was over 30 years ago, and it was when I was doing my postgraduate in teaching. But I remember the guy at Strathclyde University, he had us doing this icebreaker where we were all walking around the room like elephants. And I can't remember for the life of me why, but I just remember thinking that must have hit a chord with me. There must have been something in that activity that really went, you know what, I've remembered this 30 years later. Well, 35 years later, to be honest. Anyway, so energizers and icebreakers. So what I just really want you to get you to think about is go back to Basics 101. Are the energizers and icebreakers you're doing appropriate for your student cohort? And are you really getting what you want out of it? What's an icebreaker about? It's about allowing students to get to know each other. Secondly, here I just put some brainstorming. We've all done brainstorming, and how boring is brainstorming sometimes? It's boring. Sometimes it can be very boring. And what I've tried to do here is give you some different ways that you can actually do brainstorming activities. Okay? So you can use a placemat or graffiti or rove and record. They're all different ways of doing the same thing, rather than just having a group of people at a table and saying, okay, I'd like you to give us some feedback now. Or the person that's going to speak the most in the group gets up and stands up and says, well, I'll give you feedback. Because all you get from exercises like that is the person that likes to talk the most. Whereas strategies like this, when you read more into them and more about them, you'll find that actually what it does, it encourages all the people in your group to get up and actually contribute to a discussion. And the other example I've put up here is what we call sharing strategy, which is traditional methods. You know how we've all been part of the show and tell? You know, they do it in schools now, you know, where somebody takes somebody to stand up and they show and tell. But these are different strategies around how you can do that. Things like gallery tours, ghost tours, walkabout. Again, what they do is they stimulate discussion, activity and engagement, but not in a very traditional way where you're all sitting around the table and you just got to share something. It's not about that. What you want students to do are be highly entertained, highly actively engaged, and walk out your training session going, that was a great training session. I will remember that training session. A bit like me and my elephant ears and my elephant techniques. So regardless of the strategy you use, regardless, and you can go online and there are actually hundreds of these, so you can just have a look yourself and find the ones that suit you best. There are a couple of things you should always ask yourself. First of all, what's the outcome you want from any activity? So you know in your session plan where you've got an icebreaker, I challenge you to go back and the next time you're looking at it, your first session plan, go, what is it actually I'm trying to get out of this activity? What is it? Or am I just doing it because it was the last one I did or because someone's written it down? Is there one that's better? And the second question is, how can you facilitate these strategies to get the most out of your student? And that moves us into facilitation and how you actually unpack these. And when you go and look online, you'll find that there's a lot of information about how you unpack these strategies and how you can actually deliver them. 1.1D that we've been talking about is all about engagement with students. And one of the questions in the pilots that's come up is, but how do you just demonstrate engagement with students? As you know, through your own training experience, engagement with students is often spontaneous. It happens in an instant. It happens when you're delivering something and there's a real good connection. That's engagement. But how do you demonstrate it for compliance? And this, under Outcome Standard 1.1, is probably the most important thing that RTOs are going to have to think about in terms of compliance. So how do you? So the first thing, so in brainstorming some of this at the last Auditors Forum we had, we actually came up with some ideas that I'm going to share with you. So the first thing is on your training and assessment strategy, or your training plan, whatever you call it, you might want to incorporate or identify some key instructional advanced facilitation techniques that you're actually going to use. Okay? Because remember, your training and assessment strategy is one of your key documents in terms of your training design. So you might want to list some strategies there. I would hazard a guess that if you went back and looked at your training and assessment strategy documents right now, they would not list any advanced facilitation or good instructional design techniques. They might say the word brainstorming. There are so many different ways you can brainstorm. Okay? The second thing is looking at your delivery and your session plans. And in terms of your delivery and your session plans, you can actually start to break down and actually write within your delivery and session plans how you're actually going to change this teaching style, the strategies you're going to use. So thinking about things like, and I've written it here, so I want to make sure I do this. What's the purpose of your activity? Why are you doing this activity? An explanation of the activity. So if you're going to use an instructional technique like, for example, rove and record, what is it that you're actually trying to do with that particular activity? And what do you want as the intended outcomes of the activity? So it gets you again to think about, when you're designing training, different steps to a process. Rather than in a lot of delivery and session plans that we just see a lot of information about the lecturer, the trainer. The trainer is going to basically talk to the student for the next 20 minutes on slides 1 to 30. Sorry, okay? What we want you to move to is this level of engagement, higher levels of engagement and participation. We want you to think about your student surveys. Now, I've already mentioned that to you, so please go away and have a look at your student surveys and ask the question, are we actually asking our questions to our students if they're actually engaged, or are we just asking them if they're satisfied? I'm very satisfied when I study and I get a qualification. Doesn't mean to say I'm engaged. The next thing was some photographs, and obviously with permission, about getting photographs about all the interactive things that happen in a training session. And that in its photographs speak volumes. And often we forget to do that. Again, you're busy training people in a classroom, you're not necessarily thinking. But if you then go back to your delivery, your session plan or your delivery plan, and it actually states there that you're going to take some photos of your students and this is the rationale why, that's all good evidence about how interactive your session is and how well you're engaging with your students, and obviously how well the students are engaging with each other, because we know that learning is not just a one-to-one process, it's a three-way process. And get you to think about asking reflective questions. Okay, let's just say that you all walk out of here today and you're like, yes, I'm going to look at these instructional strategies, I'm going to change how I'm going to do things. What I'd like you to do is build into that some reflective questions that at the end of let's just say you do a ghost walk as a new challenge to you in terms of your training. You ask yourself at the end of that session, you ask the students, how did you enjoy the activity? Did you feel that the learning activity met your needs? These are all questions we should be asking students all the time to improve our training. Okay, that's 1.1D. There's a lot in 1.1D, but I suspect it's the most important performance indicator in that outcome standard and in the whole standards for you as trainers. Performance indicator 1.1E, which is the last in this outcome standard, is about risk management and contingency planning. Where the training product requires work placements or other community-based learning, necessary skills and knowledge are able to be attained in that environment. The key opportunity for you as trainers here in terms of your reflection is to think about the fact, and we all know this, that not all non-classroom based activities work for learners. And often when students are on work placement or apprentices and trainees, there are often risks associated with that. So some things that you might like to think about. And when I was thinking about these, I was thinking about them from a personal perspective when I used to have my own RTO and think about the risks that we used to have with students on work placement. So the things I came up with were really about the lack of supervision for a student in the actual workplace. And often, we think we're doing our best, we go out, our student gets on work placement, we think it's all going really well, but then you learn that the student isn't being supervised on a day-to-day basis as they need to be. The second thing was about how students often, they're with a group of students, say for example, they're coming to you and they're doing some classroom learning and then they go out for some work placement. When students go on work placement, they often feel isolated and they often feel alone, particularly, not just, but particularly younger students or perhaps people that have not been necessarily in the workplace for long periods of time. And it's about trying to develop things like social media so that you can have students stay in touch with each other. Other things that I thought about in terms of this were the out-of-date equipment that's often used in workplaces. We think often that workplaces have got the U-Boot equipment, most up-to-date technology, but sometimes that isn't the case. And therefore you have to think about that in the context of does it meet the unit of competence and does it meet the assessment requirements. One of the big ones in terms of managing risk when students are on work placement is about people's intended goals and outcomes. Often students will go to a workplace with a set of expectations, and we've probably all done that. And employers have different expectations. So how do you find the fine line and bring them both together? Well, what you do there is that you make sure that when you're designing your training, you've thought through what the work placement activity is going to look like. And you don't just give the student and the employer a set of information, but you discuss it with them in terms of the expectations. You actually have a conversation with them about what it is that they all want to achieve from it. So that's performance indicator 1.1e. So in summary, outcome standard 1 provides a unique opportunity for you to go back to the basics of training and actually think about the learning styles of your students. Think about how engaging you're making the training. Have you designed the training correctly to meet that particular student cohort? And does that particular design meet the outcomes of the training product? Outcome standard 1.12. So that's us finished with outcome standard 1.1. So there's quite a lot in that. 1.12 is slightly smaller. There are only 3 performance indicators. And those 3 performance indicators, the first one is about how you engage with industry. The second one is about what information you get from industry. And the third one is about how you use that information that you get from industry. So outcome standard 1.2, engagement with industry, employer and community representatives effectively informs industry relevance of the training offered by the registered training organisation. So what's the intent of this outcome standard? The intent is about ensuring that we are skilling people for industry. That's the business we're in. It's as simple as that. We're skilling people for industry. You'll notice that in this particular outcome standard, the focus is on engagement with industry. And notice that the actual outcome standard requires you to engage with lots of different people. And one of the questions during the pilot, I just want to highlight this, was some people said to us, well, community representatives, what does that look like? So to give you an example of that, I looked up the definition of a community representative because I thought that would be quite interesting. And the definition of a community representative is an organised collective of people with similar interests or aims. And I thought, well, that's far-reaching. Didn't really narrow it down for me. However, and then I thought, well, I'm just going to Google some in WA, see what I came up with. And the example I want to share with you, in the health services area, for example, WACOS, which is the West Australian Council of Social Services, would be considered a community-based organisation. However, if you go back to the definition, an organised collective of people with similar interests or aims, that's pretty wide. In summary then, outcome standard 1.2 is about students are taught the skills required by industry. There's a clear learning pathway for students to demonstrate competence, and industry should have the competence that students are job ready. Performance indicator 1.12 is about how you identify relevant industry, employer and community representatives and how you seek meaningful advice and feedback. The two key words in this performance indicator are identifies and meaningful. So, in terms of identify, how do you actually identify the industry you engage with? Now, hand on heart, we can all be a wee bit lazy about this. Because sometimes we might have a part-time trainer who works in industry and we just use them and their organisation as the industry representative. But how do you know? How do you know that that's the best opportunity for you to get the information you want, which is about how best to develop your students, if that's the only industry engagement you have? So the challenge for you here is think about is what is your current practice? Do you randomly contact industry and hope for the best? Do you give them enough information about what you want out of them? And when you interact with industry, do you ask them the right questions? And the right questions are about informing your training. Because if we're in the business of upskilling people, that's the question you should be asking them. That's the question you should be asking them. So in determining a suitable employer, you've got to think about the reputation of the employer, the previous experience that you might have had with the employer who hosted your students. And again, if your students have had a bad experience, there's a red flag. No one should be sending their students to the same employer twice if they've had a poor experience. The values and culture within the organisation. And again, how do you know what the value and culture of the organisation you're potentially sending students to if you don't do some research? Whether the organisation has the equipment, facilities and resources, and that really goes back to the last performance indicator, and the competence of the direct supervisor. We all just assume to a certain extent that we're going to put our students into work placement, they're going to be supervised, it's going to go really well, the supervisor has the competence in order to be able to support the student, but that is not necessarily always the case. Performance indicator 1.2b. And out of anything else I want you to think about here, I want you to think about the fact that if you are actively engaged with an employer and they give you feedback, be that formal, be it informal, be it spur of the moment through a telephone conversation at the end of a work placement, whenever it is, if they give you feedback and you do nothing with it, they will soon lose respect for you. They will not want to engage with you. If they give you feedback and take the time to do that, if you do not listen, now granted, the main point is about you listening. Whether you act on it in terms of whether or not it's real or unreal, you'd have to unpack that. But the idea is you listen to what they're saying, you take what they're saying seriously, and you decide whether or not it's worthy of any changes. Okay? And those changes should generally be something that you would document. And again, I'm going to make a reference here to an outcome standard 4.4, which is about continuous improvement. And you take the feedback and you build that into your continuous improvement strategy. Only last week I was talking to an RTO, not through an audit process, but something completely different. We were talking about industry engagement, and they were honest enough to say to me that they sought industry engagement, but when they got the feedback, they hadn't done anything with it. Okay. So often when we get feedback, we then want to go to our line managers and say, I've got this great piece of feedback. What can I do about it? I'd like to make some change. Now, you know these people here, eh? The Three Musketeers. Now, I don't know if it's just my learning style, but this model was developed by Aristotle, and it's called the Pathos, Logos, and Ethos model. And again, it might just be me, but I think of the Three Musketeers when I hear that. So hence, the diagram up here. And the Pathos, Logos, and Ethos model are all about the ways that you influence people in your organisation when you want to make change. Quite often we'll hear trainers say things like, yes, I wanted to make that change, but we don't have the equipment. Or my line manager says, yes, we'll look at it next week. There are a number of things that come up. So by looking at the Pathos, Logos, and Ethos model, it actually gives you a framework of persuasive argument where you can actually use that to go back to under the pillar of Pathos, which is about appealing to your line manager's emotions, which is about saying, look, if we do something, we're more likely to get a better student outcome. The Logos model is about appealing to a sense of reasoning. So, for example, if you want to really make a difference and you're trying to sell your line manager on it, you can actually use the argument of, this will be good for us as an RTO because we'll be able to build this into our continuous improvement strategy, which will ensure we're compliant with outcome standard 4.4. And the last part, which is the third pillar, or the third musketeer as I like to think of them, which is ethos, which is about using credible sources of information. And if you can go to your line manager and say, I want to make this change, and the industry representative that I spoke to was the leader in their field, they're more likely to allow you to make that change. So again, in terms of thinking about your argument, think of the three musketeers. And the final performance indicator, and I know we're not going to have any time for questions because I've run over time, is about training reflects your current industry practice. You will only be able to determine if your training reflects current industry practice if you ask people. So that involves, for example, talking to your students and getting feedback from them, talking from industry and getting feedback from them. Then you'll know. So some quality indicator information, it can be formal and it can be informal, but it includes things like focus groups with your students, networking events where you can actually ask employers how things have gone. It can be through things like Mentimeter that we're using today. It can just be through surveys. And if you think about it, you've got to do that anyway as part of your compliance. But go back to my earlier point, which is about you asking the right questions of your industry representatives. So, in summary, Outcome Standard 1.2 about industry engagement. It continues to maintain the intent of current clauses 1.5 and 1.6 in the current standards. But there is far more emphasis, and Claire mentioned this morning, there's far more emphasis on you thinking about how you engage with industry. How you engage with industry, what you ask industry, and how you use the information that you get back. Not just about, oh yeah, I gave them a checklist and they filled it in, thanks very much. That's not engagement. That's not engagement. So, in summary, Outcome Standard 1.1 and 1.2, they might not be different. You've maybe sat here this morning and went, thanks Siobhan, but I do that already. Right? But hopefully, I have given you some food for thought. It's an opportunity for you to review and reflect and ask yourself these key questions. Have you designed your training to give you the best outcome for your students, the best possible learning experience? Have you considered their needs and their characteristics sufficiently in order to inform your design? Is your training engaging? And maybe it is, but could it be better? Can you demonstrate that your teaching has been informed by relevant industry partners? And finally, do you continue to seek feedback? And not just continue to seek feedback, but actually, what do you do with that feedback? Some references and some resources for you. There are a number of fact sheets. All these fact sheets are listed within the main fact sheet for this training session. So please, there's lots of information. Anne said it this morning, Claire said it this morning. There's lots of resources to help and support you through the next 6-12 months as we transition to new standards. So please use them. Hot off the press, in March this year, there was some NCVR data done on effective teaching and learning. You can go into the NCVR website and find this document, and actually it's a really good piece of research. And some of what I've covered today is actually covered in this research, except what they've also done is they've made it industry specific. So they've went out and engaged with trainers from different industry and fed that into what good training, teaching and design actually looks like. Woo! There we go. Now for your feedback. So what I would like you to do is the feedback that we need you to give, the QR code, is for the whole of this morning, not just my session. So that's why we really need you to go in and look at the feedback in the context of the whole of the morning, not just this session. Thank you very much for listening.